Okay, now let me tell you something. Now I know some of you guys. Listen. This would be a smart thing to do, and I've seen people do it, but it won't work. And here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to go in the order of the way I've written these things. And I know some people go, okay, I'll memorize the order. Don't do that. Don't do that, folks, because they change the order for everybody. The computer scrambles it all. So don't even think that the order I'm giving you is the one you're going to see. That's just something you got to know. Also, I know none of you would ever cheat. I know. You're too good, and you shouldn't, because if you're this far along in your career, come on, you guys are good at what you're doing.
Or we're really good at cheating.
Don't say that. Don't say that. Don't say that. So anyway, you can't look at your neighbor's paper because his is scrambled or hers is scrambled, and it's not the same. And they even do it for the letters. They move those around too. So it's a heads up. Don't think you can look at somebody and say, oh, he put down C, and you put down C, because it won't be the same. Why they think that you guys are such cheater spiders, I don't know. But except for this guy, obviously. All right, are you ready? Now, I'm not going to give you the answers, but what I will do is give you an idea, okay? And the reason this is a study guide, I want you to, when I say something's important, then I want you to write it down and then go home and study. Right? Okay.
How many questions are there?
50. 50 questions, 2 points each. And as I said, I'm trying to get a bonus question in there that wouldn't hurt you, but it would help you if you got it right. I won't detract anything, but I don't know, they're so weird about this. Oh, you can't do that. Well, why not? I mean, 2 points? I don't see that as it's not going to turn your life around, folks.
Yeah, if you just give us a piece of paper with something on there, we can just write it in there.
Okay, here we go.
That's the answer.
Are you ready?
Ready.
And messenger.
Now we've been talking about this. Oh my God. Remember. Oh. What?
Will doctors gonna just like PowerPoint? No, this is it.
You have to be louder. I'm sorry, I can't.
She has a question about Dr. Stoyanov's material, the genetic malformation.
Oh, I have not talked to him. My guess is no, but his will be on the final. Because the final is comprehensive. So we'll probably not have his on this, but we will put it on the final. And at that point, I'll be able to give you a heads up on that too.
Sounds great. All right.
Okay. Now just remember, we just talked about this. Everything in your face, everything you're going to study except for enamel, comes from ectomesenchyme, which is neural crest. Right? We've been hammering on that so hard. Well, that just means it's real. Got to know that. So if I have something, and I have certain things in here that if you miss them, I will kill you in your sleep. I will tell you, I will just strangle you.
Good to know.
That's dedication.
Okay. So we've got we got neural crest cells, and everything's made from those except one tissue. Shut up. Okay, we've talked about it. Remember the dental papilla. You know, you've got the enamel organ, right? You've got the outer enamel epithelium, inner enamel epithelium, and what's in the middle of that is the enamel organ. Underneath it, where the bell or the cap sits, that's the dental papilla, right? Yeah. And what does that papilla? What comes from that papilla? That's certain tissues are derived from that, and also from the dental follicle, you know, that surrounds the whole tooth. But at any rate, just know the dental papilla gives rise to, and it's not going to be hard, folks. I mean, I've got. See, it's not the ascending ramus. If you put the ascending ramus, again, I'm going to come hunt you down. It's not that. Okay.
Are you sure though?
Know your arches. I don't care if you know the fourth arch so much, but you got to know first arch, branchial arch, pharyngeal arch. I don't care. Know that. Know what innervates it, because if you don't, it's the big guy. That's the trigeminal. That's the big guy that you're going to be fighting the rest of your life to try to stop people from hurting so much. So know trigeminal, first arch, second arch, facial nerve. Those are two biggies. And remember, when you move a muscle, it drags things with it. It drags its neural supply with it, which becomes important when we talk about the tongue. Oh, God. I'm too nice. I must have made these when I was drunk or something. Too nice. Okay. It's all embryology stuff. It's branchial arch stuff, and what gives rise to the jaws. Again, come on. You know that. Remember, there's two kinds of bone growth. Endochondral from the neck down, and everything in your head is what? Intramembranous. Because it's a different type of bone growth. One has, remember, the endochondral has a model of cartilage, and then you end up with growth plates at the end of it. And that's the hyaline cartilage growth plate. In your head, you don't have growth plates. They expand it to sutures, and that's intramembranous because it's surrounded in a membrane, and then it starts to ossify, calcify within the membrane. So know that your head is intramembranous. So is your clavicle, incidentally, but no one's going to ask you that. It's because it used to be a head. Boom. All right. Now, remember those sections through the branchial arches? On the outside, you've got grooves. On the inside, you got pouches. Right? Yeah. And that they turn into different things. I mean, if you think about the first pouch and the first groove, they come together and they form the tympanic membrane and the external auditory meatus. What? Yeah, never mind. It's the ears thing. So, and if they don't fuse, from the second arch overgrows the third and the fourth. But if it doesn't overgrow that, you can end up with cysts on the side, right in front of your sternocleidomastoid.
And I said the second arch doesn't grow right?
Yeah, that's because the second arch normally should overgrow those grooves, but it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you can end up with a fistula. Or in the front, you can end up with a thyroid issue, right? Oh, God, I even hate to use it, but you gotta know Meckel's cartilage. I'm not even going to tell you where it comes from, but just know Meckel's cartilage, right? I know. No, if someone asked just this morning, just today, just asked, where's Meckel's cartilage come from? And being somebody that studies evolution for a living, I said, oh, from Devonian fish, 360 million years ago. Like, no, that's not what I need. Well, that is where it comes from, but don't worry. It's first branchial arch, right? Reicher's cartilage is the second.
So
Although they're
those
trying to,
both-
Reicher's cartilage.
So, but Meckel's is from the first.
Meckel's is from the first. And remember, Meckel's cartilage does not, and I stress this only because it's on your boards, I guarantee it. I don't know why they hang up on this so much. Meckel's cartilage does not form your mandible. It does, however, serve as a focal point for the bone to start ossifying that then forms your mandible. Meckel's cartilage in and of itself does not form the osseous mandible. But the tip of Meckel's cartilage makes, incus and the malleus. That forms your two of your ear bones. The third one is the stapes, and the stapes comes from the second arch.
The stapes is also a ear bone?
Yes, stapes is an ear bone.
Can you cover the migration of the thyroid?
Yeah, I'll get to that.
Okay.
Stapes is in mammals an ear bone. I mean, you're not going to get it. It's not in reptiles. It's part of their jaw joint. It's part of the TMJ in a reptile. And we stole it from the jaw joint and put it into our ear so we have better hearing. But you're not going to get this. Just remember it's the second. All right, just know your nerves to the different arches. Just know those. Know the first three. I'm not so much worried about the vagus nerve because that goes everywhere. I mean, if you want to know the vagus, that wouldn't hurt. It's the 10th, right? And that'd be the 4th. And the recurrent, never mind. Yep. Just know 1, 2, and 3, okay?
Okay.
And vagus would be good too if you want to throw that in. Know the prominences, the facial prominences, and that's what forms your face, and that's how you get clefts, right? If they don't form properly, and what happens is if you end up with actually what's the cell rest, if you end up with epithelium that's between the two prominences, that it should, by all means, it should. There should be programmed cell death that get rid of those cells. If it doesn't happen, you can end up with a cleft. And there's all kinds of.
What do you mean prominences? Like
The facial prominences where you've got the frontal, and you've got 2 nasals, actually 4 nasals, and you've got a maxilla, and you know how they all grow. They're all ectomesenchyme, and how they all grow together,
yeah.
and they form the face. And if they don't, then you end up with a cleft of one sort or another. There's all kinds of chemicals that can cause that. Okay, now remember the tongue. Remember what innervates the tongue. You've got all those muscles in your tongue, and remember where they come from. They do not. Those muscles in your tongue, they allow you to roll your tongue and do all kinds of things with your tongue, if you can do those things. Those come from occipital somites. And remember, we stole those when we created a neck. We stole those from the back of one of your vertebrae. And we took the muscles that came with it. And those we migrated forward, so they brought that nerve with them. So the muscles of your tongue are innervated by a weird cranial nerve. It's not, for you, this is the one time you can forget the arches, because it didn't come from an arch. It came from occipital somites. So it has its own different innervation.
Is that hypoglossal?
What?
Hypoglossal, is that 12?
I'm not going to tell you. Yes. Yes, it's what it is. And that's kind of an odd one, because they had to migrate in there to get in there. Remember that placodes, in embryology, if you get a tissue thick, the tissue starts to get thicker, it's called a placode. So don't be fooled by that. It just means that it's an area where the tissue starts to get thicker, and so you have an olfactory placode, which is your nose, turns into your nostril, your nose. We have optic placodes that turn into your eye. We have otic placodes that turns into your ear. So it's just tissue thickening. Well, we've already talked sort of about this. The dental papilla, what it turns into. You know, and it's, if you think about it, it makes sense because it's underneath the enamel organ in that bell stage. The stuff that's underneath the bell, that's a papilla. And that turns into, think about it, what would you make out of that? Well, it'd have to be, it's going to be the pulp in the dentin, right? I mean, it makes sense.
So wait, the papilla makes pulp and dentin, or the enamel organ makes pulp and dentin?
Not the enamel organ, it's the papilla. Because the enamel organ, remember, that's not ectomesenchyme. That's the only thing. Now, I didn't stress this very much, but embryologically, you've got in your first 4 weeks of embryology, what you're doing there is you're just going through multiplication of cells, and you're forming the blastocyst. The morula, and then the blastocyst, and then that then attaches itself to the wall of the uterus, and the placenta starts to grow, all that. So the first 4 weeks, it's basically going through mitoses of cells. I mean, that's a little ball of cells, and it doesn't look like anything. It just looks like a little ball of cells. Okay. In the 4th to the 8th week, you go through morphogenesis. And morphogenesis is suddenly you start to differentiate those cells, and they start forming different tissues. And those are your 3 tissues: the ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm. Those then turn into tissues that are derived from each layer. Meaning that in that 4 to 8 week period, it's the danger zone. That's when you don't want to take chemicals, you don't want to have, radiation, certain things you don't want to do because you're differentiating. And if you do damage the cells when they're differentiating at that point, it'll cascade down the line. And you end up with if you mutate one of those cells, it'll continue that mutation all the way through, and you're in trouble. So that's the danger zone, is that 4 to 8 week period. After that, after 8 weeks, then pretty much you've already got the tissues and you're probably pretty safe. If something does go wrong after that, it'll be so severe that the body will normally reject it. And humans reject a huge amount of our potential births. So many of them get rejected. 50%, it's 50 to 60% of all conceptions are spontaneously aborted. And they're spontaneously aborted during the 4th to 8th week before the woman even knows she's pregnant. Okay. Oh, God. Why I'm too nice. All right. The tooth development. Know the 3 stages. I think that they're just silly names, but, the bud, the cap, the bell. Just know those. Okay, well, remember when the teeth, there's that dental lamina. The dental lamina is just a layer of tissue that sits on top of the mandible and sits on top of on the bottom, of the maxilla, however way you want to think about it. And then that invaginates into the ectoderm, the ectomesenchyme, and that starts to form the tooth. But that layer of tissue is the dental lamina. I told you sharks have a dental lamina that never goes away. Ours resorbs and goes away. Too bad.
What is it invaginated into?
Well,
What is it invaginated into?
okay, well you've got your mandible, right? And you have your maxilla that come from the first branchial arch. Ectomesenchyme, neurocrest, all that stuff. Now, early on, about 8 weeks in embryology, suddenly there's a layer of epithelial cells that are laid down on top of of the mandible and on the bottom, I guess, of the maxilla, depending how you're thinking about it. Because remember, the fetus is in all kinds of different, so anyway, it's a thin layer of hence the name lamina, of epithelial cells. That then, what happens is it then goes into the ectomesenchyme of the jaw. And that's what forms the bud. And then, then as the enamel organ starts to form, you form the cap, and then finally the bell. And you've got on the outside the external outer enamel epithelia, on the inside the inner enamel epithelia, and underneath where it sits like that you have the dental papilla. And then underneath the whole thing you have the dental follicle. And then the lamina comes down and eventually disappears. But that's interesting, that residual lamina, when the tooth erupts, sometimes is still there, and you end up with, that's why babies can have discolored teeth when they're first born. All right, the center, okay, in the enamel organ, you've got the outer and the inner, fine, it forms that cup, not cup, I shouldn't use the word cup, I should say cap, or the bell. Inside of the outer and the inner epithelia is tissue. And that tissue, you remember I said it becomes hydrophilic and absorbs water. And when cells absorb water, they expand, obviously. But if they're still connected to the other cells, what happens is they expand out like that and they form kind of star-like. They look like a star, kind of if you're looking through microscopes all day. And that's called the stellate reticulum. So, and that stellate reticulum then starts to produce enamel. But just know the stellate reticulum is inside of that enamel organ. Oh, okay, in a bone, bones are surrounded in membranes. And from the neck down, in the endochondral bone, the external membrane is the periosteum. Peri meaning close and osteum meaning bone. And on the inside is the endosteum. That's another osteogenic membrane on the inside of the bone. So they're both, that's how you can lay down bone on the outside, the external dimension of the bone, and make it bigger through the periosteum. And you can then, at the same time, make the bone thicker by laying down bone with the osteoblasts on the inside, or most likely what happens is the osteoclasts, it creates osteoclasts that then eat the bone from the inside out. That's the endosteum. That's how you can keep the cortex and the medullary canal adequate size. Otherwise you'd end up bones that are this thick in their cortex, and they'd weigh too much for us to carry around.
So the endosteum grows.
Endosteum is in the canal. What it does is as the bone gets bigger, you lay it down on the outside, and the bone gets thicker and thicker. But if you didn't eat it away at the inside, what would happen is you'd end up with bones that have cortex that thick. So you've got an endosteum and a periosteum. And around cartilage, you have a perichondrium. I don't think I'm going to ask you that, but that surrounds cartilage. Anything that's peri and chondrum is a chondrum being cartilage. Oh, what do you know? Well, we already covered that. Yeah, we covered that. All right, now bone, remember in bone, the bone cells, the osteoblasts that lay down bone material. They lay down the matrix, which is called osteoid. Then the matrix, which is it's not mineralized. Then the osteoid becomes mineralized. And as it becomes mineralized, it takes those osteoblasts and traps them inside the matrix. They can't move then, they're stuck. At that point, they become a cell, at least a different name, and that's an osteocyte. Same thing happens in the cementum where you get cementocytes. That in the cellular cementum, what happens is the cementoblasts get trapped inside of the matrix, it then ossifies, and then you call it a cementocyte. The point being, in bone, you're trapped in there and you have those Haversian canals, and the Haversian canals are a way to get, that's the only way that you can keep them alive, is by having a vascular system in there. And Volkmann's canals that connect, I don't think I'm going to ask you that. But at any rate, if you're trapped inside the matrix, that is called a site at that point. Wolff's Law. Yes, you got to know that. Remember Wolff's Law. Growing bone under stress will hypertrophy, and the absence of stress will atrophy. So if bone doesn't feel that it's being stressed enough, what it will do, it'll start dumping its mineral. That's why the astronauts have to measure their urine every day, well, not every day, twice a day, to make sure to keep an eye on how much of the mineral that they're dumping out. Which is it has nothing to do with this test, but it's something to think about, since you guys don't have enough to think about, is what would happen, what if you took a baby, or better yet, a fetus, and you took it into space, say the moon, or say to Mars, where there's only half the gravity. I'm serious. What would it look like? What would happen to its bone?
I'm pretty sure there was a movie about that.
But I mean, nobody knows.
Where the kid's like dying because he moves to Earth.
Because so much of your skeleton is determined by gravity. And what would your face or your head look like? I don't know. Nobody knows. And I don't think we want to know. I'm sure they did it with mice, and I don't know whatever happened.
I'm gonna look up space mice now.
All right, when you're growing bone, you've got the cells that grow bone, which are the osteoblasts, and cells, multinucleated cells that take it away, called the osteoclasts. Right? Yeah. Osteoclasts come from hemopoietic tissue inside of the bones. Osteoblasts come from ectomesenchyme. But who cares? Now here's one we didn't cover very well, but we did, but I'll tell you just to make sure. When an osteoclast removes bone, it has to start at the surface of the bone, right? That's the only way it can do it. So it starts at the surface of the bone, and when it eats the bone away, it creates a little lacuna, a little indentation, which you can see. You actually can see it with your naked eye, but when it first begins, you need a microscope. But you can see it in bad cases with your naked eye. It creates a little lacuna in there. What's that called? It's called Halships lacuna, or lacunae.
House ships?
Halships.
H-O-W.
Yeah, H-O-W ships. I don't know who Halship was. I have no idea. And you're not supposed to use those things anymore, but they still do. Okay, now you've got a bone, not a head bone, but a postcranial bone. You've got the shaft, and the shaft's called the diaphysis. You've got the growth plates on either end of it. The growth plates are called epiphyses. So you got the diaphysis and the epiphyses. Where the diaphysis goes out and expands out, and the reason you have the joints that expand out and get bigger is because the hyaline cartilage, stress is force over area. You have to keep the stress constant. So if you put more stress, you got limited, hyaline cartilage can only limit a certain amount of stress that because of its thickness, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you have to make your joints bigger. That's why you have big joints. And where it expands out, that's called the metaphysis. So you've got the diaphysis, the metaphysis, and the epiphysis that sits on top. and there's a layer of cartilage between them. It's called the physis, but forget about it. I don't care if you know that. And that means that that's how you grow a bone longer and longer and longer, is because it can tolerate stress. It can tolerate force. But anyway, just know the diaphysis and the epiphysis. It wouldn't hurt to know the metaphysis too. Yeah. Oh. What creates enamel? Enamel. I mean, you know it's going to end in blast, right? For sure it's going to end in blast. Ameloblasts, yeah. And where do the ameloblasts come from? Yes, well actually, but if you think about it, remember, you're starting at the bottom and you're growing your enamel out, right? So you start at the interface of the dental papilla and the inner epithelial enamel layer. And that's where you start growing out. So that inner epithelial layer is an important place where you start forming ameloblasts, and the ameloblasts then grow out towards the surface of the tooth, the crown. And as I told you, just remember, dentin grows in, enamel grows out. So they grow in opposite directions after they repolarize and go through all that little dance. Yeah.
Okay, so, why did the ameloblasts stop their work at a certain point, whereas the fibroblasts and the PDL continue to work, and the osteoblasts and the dentins continue to work?
Yeah.
What?
They reach a particular thickness of the enamel, and they die. It's programmed cell apoptosis. And what kills them, boy, if you could figure out how to keep them alive, that'd be a wonderful thing. But
I guess it depends. If they never stop, you end up with teeth.
you have teeth, yeah. And plus they're dead. Remember, they're dead. You can't, because they're so mineralized, what they're laying down is so mineralized that you can't keep them alive except through external vascularization. So, but eventually they reach a certain thickness and they just die. Too bad. You know, there is some work that people are looking at about taking stem cells and trying to figure out how to turn a stem cell into an ameloblast. If you could do that, then instead of filling someone's teeth with amalgamate, you could actually make new enamel. But it's maybe in your lifetime. Not in mine. Too bad. I thought they're going to cure cancer. Come on. What good is all that? Okay. When osteoclasts move through a bone, chomping away at it, chomp, 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 and they're eating away at the cortical bone or the trabecular bone, doesn't matter, and they're eating it away, that forms a cone. And they're actually followed by osteoblasts that then sort of fill in the cone. But what's the name of that cone? It's called a cutting cone. And you're going to have to know this later when you start doing facial growth and facial stuff, because that's constantly going on in your face. Good thing too, because otherwise you look, you don't want to have a head that looks like a 3-year-old. You would look very weird. Cute, but not so cute when you're an adult. All right. What makes up enamel? What mineralizes all this tissue? It's calcium and phosphate, but what's the name of it? Hydroxyapatite. Yeah, you're gonna be dealing with that for the rest of your life too. When you lay down enamel, it's laid down, the primary enamel, as it's laid down, is in these little ribbon-like packets, right? They're not prisms. They used to call them prisms. They don't call them prisms anymore. Now they call them enamel rods. And then you've got enamel laid down between the rods, and that's inter-rod enamel. But the primary pieces of enamel are in the rods that run perpendicular to the interface between the enamel and the dentin. So that's why those rods are, going like this, depending on where you are along the tooth. And in biomechanically, that makes sense, because they're stronger along their long axis than they would be any other way. Oh, gosh. Yeah, what makes dentin? I'm not even going to talk about it. Yeah. Okay, because of, we went over this quickly because I think it's kind of a waste of time, but it's good to know anyway. That is, remember, as the enamel grows, it grows out in those rods. And the rods are perpendicular, essentially, to the dentin enamel junction. So they're growing out like that. So if you section a tooth, you see these lines in the teeth. What's the name of those lines? In fact, you see them externally on some teeth. You can get those hypoplastic lines, and you can also see them pericomata. But on the inside of the tooth, if you section, it's the striae of Retzius.
Say it one more time.
Striae of Retzius. Another weird name.
So it's the pericoma is only on the outside.
Those are just if you look at if you section a tooth, you see these lines going out. And those are the angle of the rods, and you remember at the crown of the tooth, the rods are like that. But then as you come down the shoulder of the tooth, they go like till they're finally horizontal. And as you section a tooth, if you look at it, you have these lines, and those are the striae. And if you look at the external surface of a tooth, not in everybody, but if some people you can see externally the lines. And those are the pericomata. What?
Is it Retzius or what was it?
Yeah, they just call it striae or just lines.
Oh.
And Retzius is some guy's name, or some woman's name. I'm assuming it's a guy because they've been calling it that since the 1800s. All right, now, when you're laying down enamel, the ameloblasts, God, okay, here you've got the odontoblasts, and here you've got the ameloblasts, sitting like this at their interface. Something triggers them, and they both repolarize. And all that means is that you have a basal membrane they're both attached to, and the membrane goes away. That then stimulates these guys, particularly the enamel, that the ameloblast flips around, and then it starts, what would normally be its base turns into its apex. All I'm getting to, it does that so we can start laying down material. And it starts laying down material, and so the enamel's growing away from the dentin, dentin's growing away, and what happens is, it gets thicker and thicker. Now, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. Okay, as the ameloblast, if you look at its apical end, which is its secretion end, right? That's where it secretes. The basal end doesn't do anything except sit on a membrane. It's the apical end, and it's what they call ruffled. It has a ruffled end, and anytime you see a cell that has a ruffled end on it, it either means it's sucking something in or it's pushing something out. And the ameloblast is pushing the stuff out. It's pushing out the enameloid that will then mineralize. At any rate, so it's pushing this stuff out. It looks like a picket fence. If you section it, it looks like a picket fence. It's like an angle, like that. What's the name of that angle? So you've got the ameloblast, and it has a pointed end. and the pointed end has a name.
Is it the Reti phase?
Is what?
The Reti phase?
No, it's the same guy. There's that granular layer between the cementum and the enamel, or cement and the dentin rather, called Tomes's
Oh.
granular layer. Tomes's process. That's that picket fence thing that lays down the enamel. And I'm not going to go into it, but if you want to know, one side of the picket lays down the rod, and the other side of the picket lays down the inter-rod enamel. No Tomes's process, so that's a biggie. Who was this guy Tomes anyway? All right. Pharyngeal arches, yeah, you got that. Yeah. Oh, well, okay. So, in a growing tooth, actually in all teeth, but in a growing tooth particularly, there's a hole, there's a hole at the bottom where the root in the vascular system goes in. Or rather, excuse me, where a nerve in the vascular system goes in the hole. What's the name of that hole?
Oh,
Well, it's
he's
at the
right.
bottom of the root,
Right.
right? And you've got, in a molar, particularly an upper molar, where you've got at least 3 roots, you got 3 of these things. And in an incisor, you only got 1. Canine, you only got 1. There's at the bottom, it eventually gets smaller and smaller and smaller. It never closes all the way. But in a growing tooth, it can be pretty big. And it opens up into the pulp chamber. Okay, got it. All right, so you've got in teeth and any mineralized tissue. And the mineralized tissue in the body are bone, enamel, cementum, and dentin. The hard stuff is enamel, and the other stuff is about the same, 50-60%. Okay, we know what mineralizes that. That's hydroxyapatite. What's the protein in there? So you need a scaffolding, right? There's got to be a scaffolding that you lay down, and then it mineralizes. But before you can do that, you can create, osteoid, which just means the matrix before it's mineralized for bone. Cementoid, it lays down cementum, but before it's mineralized, it's what is the stuff that you're laying down?
Collagen, osteonectin?
Yeah, collagen. Which is, collagen is a huge part of your body, probably the most part. I mean, if you boiled a human into soup, it's all collagen. Yeah, kind of disgusting thought. I'm sure I went there. All right, and I'm going to try to get extra credit. And if I do get an extra credit in here, number 1, you don't have to answer it and it won't hurt you. But you'd be nuts not to take a stab at it. Because if you get it right, you get 2 points. If you get it wrong, it won't hurt you. You don't get anything, there's nothing lost. So, I can't tell you what, I have one here, and this is how simple this would be anyway. But you won't get this one. The evolutionary precursors of teeth are which of the following?
Scales.
Yeah, see?
That was it.
Yeah, there you go. I have.
You already had it
Wait,
yesterday.
here's a good one though, because it's all ectoderm. Hair could be hair. It's not hair. Don't worry, because reptiles don't have hair. That's kind of disgusting if you think about it. Or nails. Okay, that's it, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.